Welcome everyone. This is the second panel of our 2020 NSDA Virtual Symposium. We appreciate everyone joining us today. It was really important that while we couldn't meet in person, we could still connect virtually. This panel is very important to us because at the end of the day, the true experts in living with a voice disorder are some of the individuals you see here today on your screen along with you all. I think what we're going to do is we're going to get started with some introductions. Warren, I'm going to start with you.
Well, thanks, Kim. It's great to be here. Just want to say hi to everybody. Wish we could be in Detroit together, but this is great too. Just a little background on myself. I've been living with spasmodic dysphonia almost 50 years. I had symptoms when I was 11. I was sent to speech back. It was probably in the early 70s because they thought I stuttered. I got diagnosed in high school when I was about 16. I tried Botox. I lost its effectiveness. And I also, in 1996, I had a throat surgery where they just took out some of the muscle, so it wouldn't get so tight. But since then, I really haven't done much except get involved with the NSDA. So, well, good.
Wonderful. We want to welcome Mary Bifaro.
Hi, everyone. I'm so thrilled and excited to be on this panel. After 16 years of going to annual symposiums, it's my first experience participating in the Living with ST panel. I'm normally in the AB breakout panel, so this is very exciting to me. I guess you want me to tell my story a little.
Sure.
I've had the rarest of the rare, the AB version, for 33 years. It took 2 years for diagnosis. And when I was finally diagnosed in 1989, a new support group was forming in my hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina. And that was fate, because that was such a huge door opener for me. I was figuring out that I might not be able to continue my goal of teaching high school French. And I found this community in Charlotte, which led me to the larger community of the NSDA, and it's been my passion for many years to work on behalf of the NSDA. My heart is truly in the support end of our mission, but in the early days of my journey with SD, I was encouraged to keep writing, which I was always very comfortable doing. So it is my honor to write newsletters for Charlotte, our local community, as well as celebrate our wonderful NSDA leaders. There's 300 of us across 50 states in the U.S., as well as international regions. So my takeaway is one door closes and another one opens. And I have to repeat, the people in the NSDA community are among the most wonderful, outstanding, empathetic people that I've ever met. And it is a joy to be involved with them all.
Wonderful. Scott, do you want to share a little bit about your journey and your story?
Sure. I'm Scott Flanagan. My SD journey started in June of 2017. I had an official diagnosis of adductor spasmodic dysphonia by December of 17, and I had the SLADR surgery with Dr. Joel Blumen September or October. When did I have that done, Kim? I had that done
You tell us.
October 18th of 2018. So my SD journey was very short and compact. So it was very quick, but it was also a whirlwind of time. As Mary said, it's one door closes, another door opens, trying to learn what you can do with your job, what you can't do with your job, and how to adjust as you go along. The NSDA has been a major support for me along the way. It gave me a resource to reach out to meet other people with SD, to find out what they were going through, how to live with it, and then also great to meet Kim and all the doctors up in the Chicago area when I went to have surgery.
Great, great. And Christie DeLuca, welcome. And you've been someone who has done some webinars for us, and it's been wonderful. And you kind of have a dual, really a dual role in this community. So if you'd like to share a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Christy. So I have the AD type of spasmodic dysphonia. So I've been dealing with SD for about 10 years at this point. So it's definitely been a very interesting up and down journey with fair share of challenges, but I've also kind of seen a lot of positives in my journey with SD as well. And so I completely agree with the when one door closes, another opens. I actually became a speech language pathologist and voice therapist because I have SD. And so now I actually work with people with SD and with voice disorders, and that's become a really strong passion of mine. So, you know, my journey has been very up and down, but I would say that a lot of positives have come from it too. And so for my treatment course, I took a while to get diagnosed as well. And so it took me about maybe 2 years, maybe a year and a half to get diagnosed. And a course of like 6 or 7 doctors to actually get a diagnosis of SD. And so I kind of went through a few treatments of trialing some voice therapy and some natural treatments, and eventually landed on a small dose of Botox unilateral, and then I supplement that with some voice therapy work that I do. And so that's kind of worked for me, and that's what I'm sticking with, and that's kind of in my treatment plan. So.
Wonderful. We've kind of got a really great cross-representation of participants, because you all have had a different journey with treatment and with living with this. So what I want to do is maybe just kind of throw out some questions and even discuss amongst yourselves too, your thoughts on this. Maybe, you know, Warren, you started this SD journey pretty young. So what was it like growing up with spasmodic dysphonia?
Well, the only thing I remember when I first had symptoms, like I said earlier, I was about 11 or so in 6th grade. I got sent to speech therapy because they thought I stuttered. This went back almost 50 years ago, when nobody knew what SD was. I was lucky. I live here in Rochester, Minnesota, so I went to the Mayo Clinic. Now, I don't remember much about grade school or middle school as far as my voice, but in high school, I remember not wanting to get called on by teachers to answer questions. You know, in class getting, you know, mocked or picked on because of my voice. So it was kind of tough, but I had great friends in high school, and they kind of helped me through it. And now it's just part of who I am, and you know, you just deal with it and move on.
Great. Scott, now you made the decision pretty quick to do the surgery. So there's questions here and on Facebook about your experience with the surgery and how recovery was for you. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So my surgery, so I said I got diagnosed, I had the official diagnosis by December, and my doctor in Omaha, Dr. Christopher King, and I discussed, and he goes, we're going to do Botox, and then in the future you can consider doing the slat R surgery. So I went home that night, did some research on it. I looked at my parents. I said, there is no way I'm doing the surgery. We're going to stick with Botox. The surgery kind of freaked me out. 2 days later, I did some more research. I talked to people in the support groups that had had the surgery, and I called my parents. I said, change of plans. We're going to do surgery as soon as possible. I found out then that they want you to do so much Botox before they do surgery. And so I continued with the Botox till September of 2018. At which point I was like, I can't afford to do the Botox anymore. My insurance was not covering it enough. And so I just looked at my doctor. I said, it's either we do surgery or I quit everything. So I decided to go ahead and do the surgery right away. I chose to have Dr. Joel Blumen at the Freuder Medical Center in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as my surgeon. I drove up the end of September from Omaha to Milwaukee, met with him, and scheduled surgery 3 weeks later for October 18th. Surgery was easy. I went in at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning, and I was released by noon Friday the next day. We did our journey back to Omaha. Recovery was, I'm not going to say it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't horrible by any means. Swallowing was a definitely learning curve to learn how to swallow again. Swallowing was difficult. I could not handle thicket, so I learned how to take very small sips and just drink very carefully the whole time. The one thing they did not warn me about ahead of time with the surgery was the amount of phlegm. And so I know, at least for me personally, I had a ton of phlegm, and I dealt with that probably for a month and a half. I remember leaving the hospital that day. It was pretty foggy. My brain's pretty foggy. But I remember Dr. Blumen saying, make sure you talk, don't whisper. And so I was making careful. I went home to my parents' house to recoup for about 4 weeks in Colorado. And I was trying to make an effort to talk and sound like I do today. And it wasn't coming. I still had a really just basically a whisper at best. And so after about 4 months, I went back to my doctor in Omaha for a follow-up, and I was still not talking like this, which was odd. Usually your voice comes back within 3 to 4 months, and I was at 4 months and I had a whisper at best. And I just was like, okay, well, I did the surgery. I'm stuck with a whisper. I'm going to live with it. My doctor in Omaha and I both were like, you know what, though, I've gone through the surgery. I've done the Botox. Let's not give up. Let's do more speech therapy. He goes, you've done speech therapy since your SD started in June of 16. You've kept up with it the whole time. Let's dive back into speech therapy. So I started twice a week speech therapy, doing speech therapy twice a week from February till May of 2019. And about this time of 2019, all of a sudden I woke up one morning and I went to make a phone call, and it's like, oh my goodness, my voice is back. And it's gotten stronger since then. And I felt really great about it, no concern, until about 3 weeks ago. I woke up, I'd had a cold about 2 weeks prior. I woke up one morning, went to make a phone call, and I sounded just like pre-surgery following. I didn't panic. I grabbed my speech therapy notes, and I started going back into my speech therapy patterns. I was under a great deal of stress also at the time. After a week, I gave my doctor a call. We put me on some steroids, continued the speech therapy, and we were able to cover it. So we're thinking I just had a little muscle tension, dysphonia flare up as part of it. So I now have my laminated notes for my speech therapy, someplace where I know exactly where they are so I can dive into that if I start thinking there's something going on. Recovery wasn't horrible. I chose to take, with my recovery, a 6-month leave of absence from my job. My job was willing to work with me on that. It was really nice because my job is working with consumers and consumer education. I talk a lot in my job. And it was really nice to be able to take that 6 months off to be able to really let it progress and get through the surgery and recover as fully as I did.
You're muted, Kim.
I'm going to actually turn this over to the panel to kind of discuss. Christy, what are your thoughts about Scott using voice therapy to kind of bring his voice back and everything?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a big believer in voice therapy in terms of compensating for symptoms. And I think the muscle tension piece can be huge in terms of how you're compensating for the spasms. And so when I first got diagnosed, I was actually diagnosed with just MTD. And I had a severe component of MTD where I just did not, I was just forcing everything out so much. And I was working really, really hard to get any sort of voice and any sort of sound. And so I remember I would come home from work and I had to speak all day on phones for my job. And I would come home from work and my throat would just be so sore and so fatigued. And I just didn't know that there are other ways that I could try to release that tension and try to compensate in different ways. And so I've since learned some of those strategies, and I use a lot of those strategies I think that Scott was talking about too. And, you know, as a voice therapist, that's what I do all day, every day too. And so for me, it's not taking away my symptoms, but it's learning how to not use all of that strain and tension to fight through that and to kind of work with it instead of fighting against it so hard. So voice therapy has been a really huge part of my journey in learning how to compensate for what I'm dealing with.
Scott, any thoughts on that, or?
I just really, the whole time, even from when I kind of like Christy, I had a major muscle tension dysphonia as well when I first started the SD, when I first noticed there was an issue. And I did speech therapy the entire time. Even when I started Botox for AD, adductor spasmodic dysphonia, I continued with speech therapy clear through surgery. I don't necessarily think it helped as much as I was hoping, but I think it also prevented stuff from getting worse and gave me tools to get through my job. And I also learned to very much watch. In that speech therapy, I learned to watch how much I talked. So I'm like, okay, if I have to teach a 3-hour class at work, then I am not teaching the day before or the day after. I am saving my voice for that 3-hour span. I will do my morning therapy warm up to get my voice ready for class, get through class, rested, and then do my therapy the next morning.
And I mean, I do very similar things too. And if I have a back-to-back, you know, patients or meetings, I'll use strategies to reset, or I'll know kind of what my limit is in speaking, that I know I can't go 5 hours speaking nonstop and I need those breaks or reset techniques. And so I think that can be really helpful too. And the voice will change with getting Botox or getting surgery, and, you know, the vocal folds will try to do different things when you're adjusting to the Botox or adjusting to surgery. And so I think voice therapy can be helpful in managing how you're adapting to those too.
Christy, how has treating people with voice challenges helped you personally?
Yeah, so, you know, I think for me, it's kind of a source of, it's a passion and it's a source of empowerment that I also get, because I feel like I'm able to give back. And it's really rewarding to me because I get where patients are coming from because I live with it all the time, and I've been through the same challenges, and I know the psychosocial components of living with a voice disorder, kind of how much it can affect like every aspect of your life. And so for me, I understand it to that level, and so it's really rewarding to be able to hear other people's stories and to kind of help them navigate and give them tools to gain some more control. And I think that's a very empowering piece for me. And I think it's just so rewarding to be able to, you know, try to help people who I understand what kind of challenges they're dealing with, because I've dealt with and deal with them myself.
Mary, thoughts on that?
Well, we all know that stress and fatigue make our symptoms worse.
Mm-hmm.
So the more that we can do to address both stress and fatigue, which are part of daily life, of course. And the voice does change as we age, and we're all aging. And it's exciting to me to see young people involved in our NSDA and young researchers and healthcare professionals involved in our NSDA, because I worry about our future, but I know in the hands of young people, they will have the longevity, etc. And I think it was Christy who spoke about passion. And I think passion has a way of overriding fear and a lot of other emotions. When one finds passion, I see your beautiful quilt behind you, Scott. you are just filled with so many wonderful hormones, and life just feels less weighty and easier. And Scott, I'm going to take you up on your example of laminating some of the voice therapy techniques that I did over the years. They've kind of gotten crinkled in my pile. I need to get them out, dust them off, and laminate them.
Warren, what do you think about the passion aspect of it all and giving back?
It took me a long time to get to that point. Of course, most of us, when we first get SD, especially back when I was diagnosed, I thought I was the only one, in the world that had this crazy disorder. And it wasn't until, I don't know, maybe 10 years or 15 years after I was diagnosed, when the NSDA actually started. So that was really great to actually get a name. Just know that there's other people out there with the same disorder. And then it was 9 years ago that I went to my first symposium, and I actually got to talk to other people with SD. And as Mary and Kim know, every time I go to a symposium, I just get, energized. Right? Yeah. I just get energized to, want to do even more. So that as I've gotten older, the passion to help other people, hopefully, it seems to get greater for me every year. And stuff like this, being on a panel with these wonderful people, it just gets me, excited, and it's overwhelmed actually, because everybody I've met with SD is just incredible and inspiring. So
at our symposiums, and hopefully at support group meetings, you can feel the tension lower with people when they realize, hey, as Warren says, other people sound like me. I am not alone. And I'm around caring people who are going to take the time to listen carefully, because we all know conversation is a two-way thing. And so we might struggle as a speaker, some more than others. There's a listener at the other end. And when that listener is truly engaged, it just gives you more confidence that your message or that your words matter, or that they're really listening. And that is just so validating to the individual. And we in the NSDA community have said for many years, we don't want anyone else to have SD, but when someone comes to us with it, we feel like they're one of us. They're immediately one of us. And it's just a good thing.
I think that kind of touches on like the acceptance of it too. And I think, meeting others with SD and being able to speak with others with SD, that they are understanding why your voice sounds the way it does or what you've been through. And I think that acceptance piece of talking with somebody else who understands it, and you feel fully accepted and you don't feel like the other person's going to judge what, make judgments on you based on your voice. I think that's a really important piece of it too. I think that's something I struggled with in the beginning of, my diagnosis, was the acceptance piece of it, and wondering what other people thought when I had the voice that, wasn't what I wanted it to sound like, or, wondering what other people were thinking when I was talking. And I think it took a while for me to get to that place of acceptance and place of where I was fully embracing, okay, this is what I have and it doesn't define me as a person, And I was able to actually be open with people about it and share with people. And I think that was actually a major piece in what led me to, you know, a positive piece of my journey, was fully accepting it, but also telling people about it and being upfront about it and not trying to hide it and not being like ashamed of it, but actually being open about it. So I think that's a really huge piece too.
And we
I know.
Go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry.
I accepted it fairly quick. I don't know why. I had a really good support group, so that helped out tremendously. I really took, as soon as I found out what was going on, and even before we knew, when we kind of were thinking we knew what the diagnosis was, we weren't 100% sure, I really used it as a platform. I posted on Facebook what was going on all the time. I made sure I work, as you can see the quilt behind me, I work at a quilt store. I let everyone know, every customer, every student in one of my classes, what I had, what was going on, and what the NSDA website was. I really used it as a platform to get information out, and that helped me process it, because I'm like, if I have to live with it, I don't want people to wonder what's wrong, why is he sick? I used it as a platform to educate people. I only had one really bad experience at a Papa Murphy's. The customer behind me thought I had a flu and was giving me a hard time saying, well, you shouldn't be out if you're sick. And I kind of, in my choppy voice at that time, told her off, and I took out my business card. I wrote dysphonia.org on it, handed it to her, and said, this is what I have, check it out, and I left.
And actually that brings up a question that's kind of current. One of the questions we had was, with people assuming that you're sick, how are you doing with the whole situation with COVID-19 and the pandemic? And do you have more people asking you, are you sick or concerned that you're contagious?
Well, because I've been at a stay-at-home for 7 weeks, not really. Although the few times I went in the grocery store with a mask on, you struggle anyway. Now you're under a mask, forget about it. You didn't really need that item anyway. So,
Warren, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, like Mary said, I've seen a lot less people. So not as much lately, but yeah, you used to always get the comments like Scott said, do you have a cold, or, I hope you feel better, and, all that kind of stuff. But as Mary said, right now, not so much. Yeah.
One of the questions that we did have was regarding Mary's comments about engaged listeners. Do any of you have any phrases that you use with listeners to prompt them to be more attentive or patient with you? So curious what your thoughts are on that.
I started every class, when I taught a class, I would just say, I wrote up front, I've got a neurological voice disorder, please bear with me. And I was not as loud as Warren when I had SD. It was choppier and it was extremely, extremely soft. I had met with Kim when I went for my surgery consultation. Kim can attest how soft my voice was at that time. I just was really upfront, said, and the thing is, students really listened. Once I told them I wasn't sick and that I was going to do the best I could, that increased the listening instantly.
My husband has listened to me for 33 years, and he's hard of hearing now. So for many years, in some situations like a deli counter, I go like this, pointing at my neck. I go, I have an issue, could you lean in? Many years ago, I used a present and index card. But I laugh because my husband now, with his hearing issue, and he refuses to get hearing aids, he points at his ear. You should see the two of us in the car. It's not cute.
No, I think Scott has got the right idea. If you can tell people right up front, that you have a voice disorder, that certainly helps, I think, put some people at ease. Like Scott said, so they don't think you're sick, or something. And like you said, they might actually listen a little bit better. I don't really have any set phrases. I know, like with my wife, and I'm probably just as bad, but when one of us starts talking, it's almost like, hey, look at me when you talk or when I'm talking. But I know, like I said earlier, back years ago, I would just, if people asked me if I was sick, I would just say yes. But now I actually, like Scott, I will explain to people up front, or I'll try to, look, I have a voice disorder. So just bear with me. But
I think the cards that the NSDA has too of saying, you know, you have the voice disorder, I think that can be really helpful for people too, because even if you are not able to articulate that, there's cards that say, listen, I have a voice disorder. This is, just bear with me for a second. I think that's really helpful.
The other interesting thing was, by the time I had surgery, I had a group of students that took a class with me every month. They actually, by the time I had surgery, they forgot that I sounded like this beforehand. And they'd gotten so used to the choppy voice that they knew what I was saying, even if I couldn't get out the whole word.
Right.
Because listening to Mary and Warren, it doesn't sound, you don't sound different to me. Because I know what that sounded like. I know what I'm looking for. I can hear through the choppiness.
Right. Thank you. We're all in this together, right, Scott?
Right.
Say, Mary, there was a question about, could you talk about what your choice was in not pursuing therapy right now?
Wanting to know, do I still do voice therapy?
No, they're wondering why right now you choose not to do Botox or other therapy.
Well, I have the AB.
Right.
And I guess I've only had maybe 11 injections by 2 different well-skilled practitioners over 33 years with the problem. And the result for me personally was minimal at best. And the only time I really public speak is on behalf of the NSDA. So I have a mic, you know, I have a personal mic that I use when I chair our meetings locally. And of course, when we do our annual meetings, we have wonderful mics at the podium. So I have learned that the mic is my friend, and I guess over the many years, I have felt that, you know, I live with SD. It's just something else I live with. It is not like threatening my husband and my friends. Know already about, like Scott just said, how my voice sounds anyway. And so, but everyone's journey is individual. And, you know, we're not about judging anyone's decision regarding therapy or not.
Right.
It's life-changing, not life-ending.
Right.
Exactly. So, Mary, I know in my case, I used to get Botox shots about, gosh, it's been like 25 years. And I got Botox for maybe a year and a half, and then it lost its effectiveness. And then like I said earlier, I had a throat surgery where they took out some of the muscle just so my throat wouldn't get so tight. And ever since then, I've had people say, well, there are other Botox now you could try. And I just finally got to the point where it's like, no, that's okay. I'll live with it and just, I'm okay where I'm at. And, you know, I just basically, for the most part, accept it. But so that there was really, I don't think there was a conscious effort, so to speak, to not do therapy, like speech therapy, or maybe try different Botox. It just kind of evolved over the years where I accepted where I'm at, and it's like, well, I'm okay where I'm at, you know. So yeah.
I will say too, for me, for the Botox, it wasn't an easy, quick success or easy, quick decision to get it. And I spent about 1.5 years without treatment and without Botox. And so it took me a little while to actually find what worked for me too, even with the Botox. So the first shot I got, it missed, it didn't work. So I didn't have any effect from that. And I probably gave up on the Botox for another year after that. And then I just needed some relief. So I went back to the Botox, and then I got really breathy. And so I think that happens with some people too. And then they try 1 or 2 injections and it kind of has that effect, and then it doesn't work. But I still kept giving it a shot because I just wanted something to help with some of my symptoms at the time. And so I would say play around with the dose too if you're looking to get Botox. Because for me, I had 3 weeks of side effects that were pretty significant for me for the first like 2 injections that worked for me. And that just was almost worse for me than the actual SD symptoms, because I was on the phone and I was just, you know, did not have a voice at all. And so that's why the unilateral has actually been really beneficial for me, because I get a very low dose and I only get it on one side. And so if you're somebody I saw a comment somewhere here about like having a very long breathy period, you might want to try only getting one side injected, or might want to try a slightly lower dose, because those made all the difference for me. And so Botox doesn't completely take away my symptoms. And I still kind of feel breaks happening, or kind of compensate for them in different ways. But I'd say it's not necessarily always just a slam dunk the first time you get it. And so it might take a little, like 4 or 5 shots to figure out what that dose is that might help you. But there's no right or wrong answer. And some people, the voice is what it is. And so each person's decision will be completely unique and completely personal to what they need and what they feel is okay and working for them.
And Christy,
Question for, oh, sorry, Kim.
oh, no, go ahead. I wanted to follow up on that, but go ahead, Scott.
Question for the other 3 panelists. How did you get your Botox injections administered? Mine was always through the nose. I chose to have it done that way. It was significantly more expensive, it turns out. I never had really good results with it. We were up to 2.5 units of Botox per side. But I'm curious on how you had your Botox injected.
So I've always had mine through the neck, through EMG. I've never had one through a scope.
Me neither.
Yeah, me too. Right in the middle.
Christy, we are doing Facebook Live, and one of the questions was, what advice do you have for the phone? And I know you've talked about that, and that's a question that everyone has. So, so would you like to talk a little bit about that? And also, in conjunction with that, any sensory tricks that people have used to help with the SD?
Yeah. So if you're interested in these, I did a whole webinar talking about kind of tricks and tips to use for these. So you can definitely check out those webinars too, because I go into more detail. But for the phone, I would say do some voice warm-up. So if you have done some resonant hums before, I think someone was talking about this before, warming up your voice before you speak for the day, and then warming up your voice before you have a phone call. So I do that. I warm up my voice before I even start the day. So I'll do some resonant hums at my lips to really feel that vibration. I'll do some straw phonation, which I demonstrated in the webinar. And I'll really get my voice to a more forward place that feels a little bit easier for me. And then I feel like I have more control. And so I'm entering whatever conversation I'm entering with that feeling of, I kind of know my voice is up here and I have a little more control going into that. And so I'd say practice your hello, practice how you answer the phone too, because that could be, you could feel great and then you get into that anxiety place where the second you pick up the phone, it's all that tension because you're anticipating what it's going to sound like on the phone. And so trying to release some of that and practice what you might say on the phone, or reset and try to kind of warm up your voice before that could be helpful. But I go into that in more detail, so if you're interested, the webinars kind of speak to that a little bit more.
And that's the exact warm-ups I do every day. I do the hum, blow the water into some bubbles to get my breath.
Yep.
And I'd like to mention too, those webinars were so fabulous that we actually combined them, and they are part of the virtual symposium playlist. And so when you go to the YouTube channel with all of the presentations, Christie's is in there. It's almost an hour long, and she just has some fabulous tips in there. And I have a follow-up question for you, Christy, regarding Botox. What dose do you get on one side, and what is the course of your response?
So I get a very low dose, so I only get 1 1.0. And so that's a pretty low dose. And I only get it on one side. And so for me, like I said, it doesn't take away my symptoms completely, but it gives me that little boost that I feel a little bit of a relief in terms of the effort and a little bit of a clearer voice quality. So for me, the sound of my voice also matters to me because of the job that I'm in. And so I'm a voice therapist, and so I have to kind of serve as a voice model also, which adds another layer of challenge. So for me, it's the sound of my voice does matter, and that's why I do use the Botox as well as the therapy. And so I get injections every 3 to 4 months. It's been recently like a little over 5 months because of COVID. So it gives me a little boost. It doesn't, do all that much for me, but it gives me the boost that I need to be able to then carry through with the techniques that I'm used to using. And I would say it took me about a year to a year and a half to actually figure out that dose for me, because I was getting super breathy with the bilateral injections or the higher doses. And so it took a lot of patience and kind of working with my doctor and saying that shot was too much for me. I need to go down a little bit in dose. And my doctor, really gave me the independence and also kind of saying, where do you want to go with this? Do you want to go down? We can go down a little bit, or do you want it to last a little bit longer? And are you okay with the 2 weeks, 3 weeks of breathiness? And so those were decisions that I kind of made along with my doctor. So that's kind of what I do now, is the one unilateral every maybe 4 months at this point. But yeah.
Oops, you're muted.
You're mute.
I keep going back and forth, sorry. Any other thoughts about the sensory tricks? Anybody else have things that they do that might be helpful? And Scott, I know you touched on the warm-up techniques that you use. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that too, and how those have been useful for you.
So I was using the same warm-up techniques that Christy just went through. Those are exactly what I do. I also I've worked really hard since then to also work on not letting my stress get to me. If I get really stressed, it's going to start causing the muscle tension dysphonia to flare up.
Mm-hmm.
And even since my last thing, I still feel some tightness in the neck when I talk.
I think becoming aware of that is really important, because for me, I had no idea that I even had that amount of tension when I was speaking, when I was dealing with this for the first few years. And like even becoming aware of that was a huge piece for me of saying, wow, I really do feel like it's just like completely constricted in my throat, and I actually can release some of that. And for sensory tricks, you might notice, like, if you're speaking in a high pitch, if you're speaking in kind of like a sing-song quality, that those things, or a whisper, that your symptoms kind of might disappear a little bit or go away temporarily. And so I wouldn't recommend speaking in those manners all the time, but you can kind of use more of like a sing-songy kind of bouncy voice, or use kind of maybe a slightly higher pitch, or maybe kind of like a little bit more breathiness, in terms of kind of using those sensory tricks to your advantage.
He had ever noticed, like when you're speaking with your dog, your son's dog, your voice just automatically changes. And of course, there's no fear that the dog can't get what you want. So, and also in the voice therapy things, which I just did, sit up straight, drink a lot of water, think about your breathing, and I don't know, it's not sensory though, it's just things I picked up.
I think the psychosocial component of the disorder is not one that's talked about, I think, as often. And I think addressing those symptoms too, in terms of, the anticipation of what you're going to say and how your voice is going to come out. And I think those are, thinking about what others are thinking when you're speaking. And I think those have a huge impact on the tension or how your voice comes out, and kind of recognizing those and trying to target those with your either doctor or speech language pathologist, or whoever, is also really kind of important, and was important to me in recognizing kind of all those thought patterns that were actually perpetuating my symptoms or making my symptoms a little bit worse at the time.
Mhm. And Christy, you have a webinar coming up on that exact topic.
Too. I do.
So
Yes, it's Thursday.
yes, so you know it's another opportunity to talk more about those challenges and stuff. And you know, one of the questions we received was, what's the best thing about having a vocal challenge?
I have learned empathy, and I have realized that everyone we meet is dealing with something, and that we all need to be kind.
Absolutely. I think for me, it was kind of a perspective shift, and exactly like Mary said, you know, you never know what invisible or visible disorder other people are dealing with. Everyone's dealing with something, some sort of challenge. And I think for me also changing my perspective and not seeing the SD as something to be ashamed about or like a weakness, but actually something that I recognize as a challenge, but that's something I'm rising to the challenge, and something that's actually given me a source of strength instead of looking at it as something that makes me weak or that I'm ashamed about, I think is important.
I think in my case, it, like Christy was saying, you know, getting to the acceptance point, and I have to say, Scott, it's great to hear that you have accepted it relatively quickly. You know, it took me. I always kid about when I was in my 20s, my lost decade, because we all go through the different stages, you know, of grief, so to speak. And my 20s was kind of my angry stage, where I just, you know, couldn't accept what I had. So it took me quite a while to get to the point I'm at, where I'm relatively okay with what I've got. And if this is the worst thing that happens to me, there are so many other worse disorders or worse conditions. I'm okay with that. I guess I've just learned to accept my condition and deal with it the best I can. And, you know, make it more of a, like Christy was saying, and I'm losing what you exactly said, but making it more of a strength than a weakness. But it took me a long time to get there. So Scott, I'm really happy that it took you a much shorter time span. But yeah.
It helped I had an amazing support system behind me, which helped out tremendously. I live near Omaha. My parents live in Denver. From the very first appointment I had in June of 2016 through surgery, my parents never missed a monthly doctor's appointment for a follow-up or Botox. They drove from Denver to Omaha every single month for almost 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Which made accepting it easier because I knew I had the support.
Right.
I'm glad I've had my SD journey. I have learned so much. I've met incredible people. I got to go to DC last year and testify to help get funding for more research into SD. I really felt that it's I'm glad I did it. It's one of those things I'm like, I would never wish it on anyone, but I've learned so much and grown as a person because of it. I'm kind of glad I had this journey started.
I would also kind of agree with that. As challenging as it has been, I can't imagine not having it. And I think it's led to a lot of positives in my life. And also, like Scott was saying, like has definitely made me grow as a person too. And it has taught me a lot in terms of patience and perspective taking and being grateful for the little things that we normally don't even pay attention to, like health and walking and, you know, what communication we do have. And so that's been a whole journey in itself of kind of learning how to shift that perspective. But I would say it's taught me a ton.
Mary, any thoughts on that?
I agree with my fellow panelists. It's a wonderful journey. And for me, 33 years ago was mostly my young boy because my husband was away every week for business. my young boy was my voice. He ended up diagnosing more than one person in a drive-through of fast food because he would jump between the steering wheel and me in order to place the order. But my daughter-in-law tells me all the time about, my son's empathy. And when he spoke recently in our home to a gathering of the SD community, he wanted to speak, and he's not a public speaker, but he says, my mother just loves all you people, and you've been a part of my life since I was a little guy, and now I'm approaching 40. So you never know who is really listening to you. And we in the SD community have come to realize that we are so much more than the sound of our voice.
It's amazing all the different ways you can communicate when you don't have a voice.
Mm-hmm. And learning to listen too and become a really good listener too. And not to say that, not to say that the emotions of dealing with it are not significant, because everyone goes through that and deals with that on a daily basis. But there is also this positive side, even though, those emotions are valid and okay and normal, and everyone goes through that. But there is also, if you choose to kind of see it, there is also this positive side that I think we've all kind of gotten a taste of too.
And I think we're going to have to wrap up. So maybe one more comment from each of you, maybe advice or thoughts on this journey. Start with you, Warren.
Well, all I can say is, you're not alone. There are many of us that know what you're going through. As all these people have said today, make the best of it. Look at it as an opportunity. There are so many great people I've met through the NSDA, through going to the symposiums, through support groups, now through these Zoom meetings. It's not the end of the world. It's, as most of these people have said, it's an opportunity. So just you are not alone. If you need help, I think most of us would be willing to, get an email or something from you.
Christie?
Yeah, it's hard to sum it up. I could speak for hours on this, but I would say figure out what works best for you, and your journey with SD is not necessarily going to look like anybody else's journey. And I think, figuring out what you need to do to learn to accept it and to be open with others about it, and finding what treatment really just balances in your life. I think that's kind of the best course of action, and connecting with others who have it, I think is really important. So empower yourself. I think that was one of the biggest things I learned, was the piece of empowerment and educating myself, and then connecting with others who had it and sharing my journey. Beautiful. So it's
Scott?
Find the positive moments. It's very easy to find the negative moments and want to dwell on the negative moments in your SD journey. Find the positives and promote those. Make sure you point out, this is a good thing that happened today, and I can live with this. It is life-changing, not a life-ending diagnosis.
And Mary, take us out.
I read recently that the comeback can be stronger than the setback. I know so many people with SD who have risen above, and I call them ST warriors. And I'm just so proud of all of their efforts despite the struggle, and so grateful that there is a community that cares so much. And Kim, I want to thank you for including me. I cannot believe you asked me, and it's just been delightful.
Well, as I always say, our organization is driven by our volunteers, like all of you, and you really help us move this organization forward. Without you, we are nothing. And I get emotional when I talk about that. So,
And we love that about you.
and you know, out of everything, I think this has really shown us that even though we can't be physically together, this is going to provide an opportunity for us as a community to connect even more. And I can't thank Christie enough for helping us launch these webinars and these programs and get us comfortable doing this, because that was what made this symposium possible. So thank you, Christie, for your willingness. And you are prolific in sharing information, and we are just so grateful for that and for all of you. And thank you, everyone who joined us. This is not the end of the conversation. We will be doing many more of these. It's just such a wonderful opportunity. We have people on internationally, and it's really inspiring. And people have wrote that, how inspirational, inspiring this panel was, and I couldn't have asked for a better group to join us. So I'm going to take a quick picture so everyone smile. Perfect. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we are going to move in to the research panel next. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye.